All right. Welcome to our national press conference with Chili's workers. I'm Anthony Advincula, Director of Communications for the Restaurant Opportunity Centers United, joined by Dr. Siku Sibi, President and CEO of ROC United, as well as my other colleagues at ROC. Thank you everyone for being on this call. Today, we will hear stories from our Chili's workers who are based in Florida, California, and New York. Most of these stories have not been told publicly before, but they wanted to speak and hope that they would find some resolutions to what they went through while working at Chili's. A couple of housekeeping, especially for the reporters. Except for the speakers, everyone will be muted during the entire presentation from our speakers. And you, for the reporters, please post your questions at any given time on the chat box so we can keep track of who is in the queue, and you will be asked to unmute yourself when you ask your question during this session. To begin, I will hand it over to my colleague, Jordan Romanes, who will give us some background about the working conditions at Chili's and introduce our first speaker.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with everybody today. As Anthony mentioned, my name is Jordan Romanes, and I've had the privilege of working at ROC United since 2013 in various roles, mostly as the digital organizing director. Since our founding, we have won over $10 million in the form of wage theft and misappropriated tips, almost $2 million from this year alone, actually. And we've also played a meaningful role in passing local, state, and federal legislation. So we are here today because of the poor working conditions that are prevalent in the restaurant industry. Every year, the Department of Labor comes out with the 10 lowest paying jobs. And every year, the restaurant industry makes up at least half of those 10 jobs. And the same industry is responsible for close to 40% of all EEOC complaints, even though the restaurant industry makes up just 10% of the entire workforce. And the most damning statistic that speaks to the living experience of restaurant workers is this. When it comes to tipped workers specifically, on average, they use food stamps at almost twice the rate of the rest of the workforce, meaning the same people who put food on our tables often can't afford to put food on their own table. Now, one of the largest restaurant chains that is responsible for these systemic problems is Chili's, a company that has publicly stumbled through the pandemic, and recently they've reluctantly acknowledged their inability to retain staff, among other problems. So today we'll be hearing from 4 brave workers who will share their stories about their experiences working at Chili's. The urgency of these issues, they came to us earlier this year, maybe in June or July, when the hashtag expose the pepper went viral on TikTok after Alexandra Torres began sharing her experience about what it was like to work there. Since then, we have partnered with Alex and we created a confidential texting hotline called the Spice Line for people to reach out to ROC and learn more about their rights. We hope that these stories will motivate others to come forward and to move the company to fully address these issues. Without much further ado, I will welcome Alexandra Torres, our first worker who's going to speak. And she's a real inspiration. She's a rabble rouser. She's the kind of person that keeps me at ROC for so many years because she's very powerful and she motivates so many more people to step forward. Alex?
Thank you, Jordan. Hey, everyone. My name is Alexandra Torres. I do go by Alex. And I'm so grateful and appreciative to have the opportunity to not only speak with you guys, but to be able to share our stories and speak our truth. On May 18th, 2021, I posted a video saying why I believe Chili's is going under, and I listed just a few of the reasons why. I had no idea that video would open up Pandora's box. That video ended up going viral right away, and I got hundreds of comments and DMs on multiple social media platforms about the wrongdoings of Brinker International in general. Sexual harassment was the one that took precedent. So many women came forward and shared their stories with me about how they were sexually harassed by a manager or a coworker, reported it to HR, and nothing got done. A lot of women had to quit due to this, but some didn't even get the opportunity to quit on their own. They actually got fired due to the managers retaliating against them for coming forward. Then the endless stories about abuse and exploitation came flooding in. Not only were the employees frustrated with the fact that they were all essentially working for free with the new ghost kitchens, where they're doing extra work at no extra pay, they were all complaining to me about being overworked and underpaid. Employees were working 6 jobs at server pay, and I know this because I was one of them. In California, Chili's dropped the cooks' wages from $20 an hour to minimum wage and started having the servers tip them out. On top of that, they added a new runner system where servers have unnecessary assistance at the expense of their own tips. Due to these changes, some servers have reported going into the negative and walking out with no money because they are paying the rest of the staff. At the peak of COVID, I was getting message after message about how Chili's wasn't following COVID protocols. Due to this, there were several stores that had 10 to 15 COVID outbreaks at once. According to the CEO of Brinker Wyman Roberts, they have had 5 deaths due to COVID in the last year. Employees were not given time off to get tested for COVID when they showed symptoms, hence spreading the illness and getting everyone sick. Since I started my Expose the Pepper series back in May, the hashtag has gotten over 1.3 million views, and the stories just keep coming in. The reason that I feel this is so important to speak out on is not only to better the workplace for these employees, but people deserve to know the truth behind their beloved Chili's. Chili's social media team is doing an amazing job at staying on top of the trends. It's a pop culture icon. Chili's has had a cult following for years because they present themselves to be cool and hip and as one of us, but they're really far from it. I want people to take the veil off, take the blindfold off, and see what Chili's and Brinker for what it really is. It's not cool, it's not hip, it's not fun, and it doesn't care one bit about its employees. Chili's and Brinker in general, they need to be held accountable for their actions. They have reached out to me about 3 times to try to silence me, maybe actually more than that, but gave up when they saw that I wasn't going to stop. Now they just ignore all the allegations and issues, just like they ignored all the people that came forward. Brinker needs to provide sick pay, or at least allow people to take the time off when they are sick without fear of losing their job. They need to actually do a thorough investigation when people come forward with sexual harassment allegations and fire those that are guilty and not allow them to keep their job or just transfer them to other stores. And they need to start paying everyone accordingly and stop abusing and exploiting their staff. I do hope that this conference will help achieve that. Thank you for your time. Thank you to everyone who's going to be speaking today. You guys are amazing, and we would not be here without you.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you so much for sharing your story with us. Quick question before we go to the next speaker. After your TikTok post went viral, how many workers at Chili's have reached out to you, and what did they tell you? If you can tell us more about that.
I have lost count because I do have it in a series on TikTok where I started the Expose the Pepper series, and I got up to about 25 episodes of just stories of testimonies that people had shared, but I had so many coming in that I didn't have the time to keep doing specific individual stories. Even just yesterday, I had, up till today, I still have people messaging me with their stories. I had, like I said, I had people that were being threatened to be fired if they took the time off due to COVID. I had actual guests messaging me that they overheard employees saying that they were sick with COVID but had to be at work. I had people message me, women message me that they got fired for reporting sexual harassment to corporate. There's just so many. On top of that, the abuse and the exploitation. I had managers tell me that after 20 years, they left the company because they saw how wrong it was, how the employees were being treated, how they were being exploited, how they were not being paid properly. The stories just keep coming. I mean, it's so much I could tell you everything, but we'd be here all day.
Thank you. We have a question here. Raymond, if we can hold on to that at the very end, probably in 20 minutes. Alex, thank you again, but hang on because we will have more questions for you. Our next speaker is Katie Watkins. She is a worker based in Florida. Katie?
Hi, everyone. My name is Katie Watkins, and I'm 19 years old. I'm truly honored to be here and be a part of the important conversation about our experiences working at Chili's. From August to November 2020, I worked as a hostess in Chili's in Florida. This was when the pandemic was in full swing. It was a very difficult time. We had 4 restaurant managers. One of them was a guy named Todd. He was in his late 60s, early 70s, I think. Since I started my job there, Todd would always stare at me when I was at the host stand. He would ask me what I was doing after work, and he constantly told me to be safe. He made jokes that I didn't get and called me cute when I did not want that attention from him. I called HR and informed them about my unease working with him. The management said that they will open an investigation and keep me updated, but I never heard from HR and never received any updates. Then later on, they called to tell me that they didn't find anything, at the investigation had been closed. So nothing had really been done. Then one day when I was in the middle of my shift, I felt Todd's hand on my rear end. It was humiliating and disgusting, and I went to no one about it because I didn't know who to go to. HR hadn't helped me in the past, so I figured I'd be alone. And for that, that was the final shot, and I decided to leave Chili's because I wasn't safe and the management could not protect me. When I put in my 2 weeks, I found out that the other managers had no idea anything was going on. I heard from the other workers that Todd didn't get fired, and I think HR transferred him to a different location, but I'm not sure. I was not the first and only victim of sexual harassment at Chili's. To my knowledge, there was another woman who also quit because she was sexually harassed while working at Chili's. I want to make people aware of the unsafe working conditions at Chili's. I want to share my story to warn others, and I wanted to file legal action, but I was told I can't now because it's been too long. I'm happy where I am now. I've been delivering pizza since February, but I feel safe, and that's the most important thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie, for speaking out. I know it's a difficult, it's difficult to share that kind of experience. I have a quick question for you. With that experience, what would you like to see at Chili's or any fast food chain in the future?
I would like to see change. I'd like to see, change within like HR departments. I'd like to see people listening. I'd like to see, because that's the main thing is people don't listen. I reached out before anything too severe happened and no one listened. So all we need is change. They just need to listen and change.
Thank you, Katie. Our next speaker is from New York. She's from Long Island, New York, and her name is Stephanie Shama. Stephanie, your turn.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much to Katie, Alex, and Steve for sharing your stories. And thank you, everyone, for being here. And thank you to all the support that I've been getting from ROC. So my name is Stephanie Shama. I worked at Chili's from 2017 to 2021. I worked in the Long Island location, and I started working there when I was 19 years old. For nearly 5 years, I saw how the company exploited its workers, most especially during the pandemic. While we were severely short-staffed with only half of our workers returned to work, the management still forced us to work in full operation. When our New York dining restriction was lifted, the safety protocols at Chili's were very loosely enforced. There were times where I was forced to take tables directly next to each other instead of being 6 feet apart and at half capacity. When New York State lifted when New York State had their curfew in place, my manager very loosely enforced it and forced us to take customers that would linger until after the legally mandated hour. Additionally, proper sanitation procedures were not done in a complete manner, or they were not done at all. And in the back of the house, the kitchen was extremely narrow and it had to fit many employees at once, and it was almost impossible to socially distance. This negligence put both Chili's employees and customers at a higher risk of exposure to COVID, which several employees at my location got sick with throughout the pandemic. Eventually, the New York State governor lifted the capacity restrictions and curfew in restaurants, but unfortunately, our restaurant was not equipped with the staff to do so properly. The areas of the restaurant that used to require 6 servers on weekends were operating with only 2 servers. Despite being overworked, Chili's management never offered us hazard pay or wage increase, as we put ourselves at greater risk while doing triple the work. Chili's also never gave us paid sick leave, which means if I got sick, I had to fend for myself. In addition to that, we had no bartender. The management forced us to make all our own alcoholic drinks. Even if we were not trained to bartend, we had to run all our food and bus all our tables. Like most of the workers there, I never received any words of appreciation and gratitude for my hard work. We would have to stay very late doing non-server related side work, such as closing the bar or doing deep cleaning of the booths, which means we were just getting paid as regular tipped workers, and it was basically wage theft. During the pandemic, Chili's customers became even more hostile, but at Chili's, the customer was always right. And by always right, I basically mean exactly that. The customer would be allowed to verbally abuse and harass the staff, and management would still require us to serve them. Even though I told my manager about these incidents, they always just fell on deaf ears, and these unruly customers were still allowed to eat in the restaurant. I have had countless experiences in which guests made me uncomfortable, and I was told to simply ignore them. Of course, ignoring them was impossible. If they were in my section, I had to give them service. And the money that these customers brought in always outweighed our safety nearly every time. And my particular general manager was very condescending and rude, specifically towards women. For example, if I couldn't lift something that was heavy because I was afraid I would hurt myself, he would kind of scoff at me. He was very unapproachable and would gaslight his staff into thinking there were no issues at his restaurant. And if you confronted him about an issue you were having at work, he would dismiss your concerns and convince you that the problems didn't exist. He would say that a shift wasn't that bad without having any clue about what you went through that night. And his lack of support in these scenarios basically made me feel like it was pointless to go to him if I was uncomfortable or had any other issues. So eventually I did put in my 2 weeks. Chili's was a toxic, unsafe work environment with no protection for its workers. Most workers at Chili's are afraid to file complaints because they would often get fired or transferred if they reported having a problem with management. And this is a top-down issue with Chili's HR, where they're basically there to protect management that does good numbers for their restaurants, even if they have a very extensive history of issues with their staff. I hope that my voice gets heard so that the workers who are still at Chili's no longer suffer from the same abuse and exploitation that I experienced. In addition to that, Chili's should serve as an example as to why the entire restaurant industry needs to make changes that normalize proper treatment of its workers. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie, for your powerful words. Question, why didn't you share your story sooner? Why now?
Basically, like I said, this is a top-down issue at Chili's. So if you report your issue, HR is pretty much there to just support management. And I was afraid of either retaliation or losing my job or even losing the money shifts that I would get.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we're down to our last but not the least speaker. He is a worker based in Los Angeles, California, and his name is Steve Herfkens. Steve, your turn.
Hello. And just a quick piggyback off of Stephanie, it's concerning that so many of the things that she said can relate to me, and I'm on the complete opposite coast of America. But further ado, my name is Steve Herfkens. I'm 23, and I recently worked at Chili's in Los Angeles as a host and food runner for about 2 months, beginning of September to about the end of October this year. I enjoyed my job, but the way that we were treated and the working conditions at Chili's made the experience just awful overall. Under California labor law, which I spent a lot of time looking at while I was working there, It requires that every 4 hours of work constitutes a 10-minute, on the clock break, and every more than 5 hours constitutes a 30-minute off the clock break. But when I was at Chili's, myself, as well as a lot of my peers, were denied any kind of break the majority of my shifts overall. Whenever I asked, the managers would deny my request to take a break with, just they would feign ignorance, or they'd give me an excuse such as the restaurant is like too busy, regardless if the restaurant was actually too busy, because I would know because I was at the host stand. I was literally seating people. We weren't trained to know our rights as workers because most of my coworkers, as well as myself, were very unsure about how we even would go about taking breaks. I remember asking some people, some coworkers, and they told me they were unsure if we even got breaks at all. They were convinced that we didn't get breaks. And there is this one very challenging instance, another byproduct of awful training, where my Chili's manager forced me to work alone on a double shift as a food runner. After receiving very minimal to no training the week prior. Management would always do this. They would schedule workers for double shifts constantly without telling us. And while we couldn't see when our shifts ended, the management could see, and they would refuse to inform us when. So we would just know when we start. We do not know when we stop. And here's a big one. The Chili's location where I worked also failed to follow the Los Angeles County mask mandate, which states in all indoor public settings, venues, gatherings, and public and private businesses in Los Angeles County, regardless of vaccination status, masks are required. When inquired about masks, management said not to worry about it and not to enforce it on any patrons, putting me and my other coworkers at risk. The senior management employees also wouldn't wear masks in the back of the house. And at some point, someone did contact the health department, and health officials saw workers not wearing masks. But a few days later, the management didn't change anything, and we went back to the way it always went. Overall, I felt unsafe at Chili's. I resigned last month, October 15th. I felt mistreated, and I want to hold the management accountable for the exploitation of me and my peers. I want them to compensate workers for the hours that we were supposed to be on breaks and unpaid shifts, and I want the management to answer and respond seriously to complaints. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Question before we proceed to the Q&A. Would you want to be compensated for those lost unpaid hours?
I would like to be compensated for those unpaid hours. I mean, wouldn't anyone? But it's not just about the money. It's more importantly, bringing all this exploitation to light and making sure that we can do something about it, especially through organizations like ROC. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, it's time for our reporters to field their questions. I believe the first one comes from Peter White of the Star Tribune. Peter, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
It's more of a comment, but I like their comments. Years ago, I had a roommate who was worked in a union shop in San Francisco as a waiter, and they unofficially were able to fight back about, mistreatment by one of the mechanisms is they pooled their tips. They were fair about that. And so they've built solidarity that way. But the first story that we heard about how the management reduced the pay for the kitchen help and then had the servers, essentially pay for help they didn't need. That's I don't know how you would beat that. Did anybody have an idea about how to, build, opposition by building solidarity with the other workers? What kind of things did they think about doing?
Alex, would you like to answer that question since it was your first presentation?
Yeah, so the issue is not that there's not solidarity. The issue is that Chili's or Brinker International was putting it on the servers to pay the rest of the staff. The cooks were not happy with their wages being lowered. There were cooks that were there 15 plus years and were opposing this change because they were not happy with it. They deserved their $20 an hour. It got dropped to minimum wage against their will. Nobody was okay with it. And with the staff tipping them out, they're still not making as much as they were making before. So they're not happy with the change, and a lot of cooks have quit due to that. The server staff, it's not that we don't want to help each other. It's just that it's at the expense of our own tips. And all of the money has been cut to about half from what we were making. So when I transferred from Florida to California, I was only tipping out 1% to the bar in Florida, which was fine. It was only 1% of my sales. When I got to California, that bumped up to 5.5% of my sales. And that is not based on tips. It is based on sales. So if I don't make tips that day, I'm paying out of my own pocket to pay the rest of the staff. This is not something that we voted on, that we asked for. We never asked for extra help. Chili's just implemented this new assistant runner helper system against our will and then made us pay for their jobs. So it falls on Chili's and corporate. It's not about us not being a team. We are a team. We're more than happy to help each other. It's just, we don't think it's fair to come out of our own pockets for a job that they created against our will when we were opposed to it in the first place.
Thank you, Alex. Is there anyone among the speakers, including Jordan, to address it? Otherwise, we'll move on to the next question. We have a lot of questions here on the chat box. Anyone would want to take on that? All right, there you go. So our second question is from Raymond Tyler. Raymond, if you can unmute yourself and ask your question. You have several questions, actually.
I got so many. After the TikTok video and these millions of people responding, did you ever hear from anybody at the health department or local politicians or someone in power who could actually talk to these, all these terrible things that's been going on? I don't even know where to start.
Was that directed towards me? It was really bad connection at the beginning, so I didn't hear the first part.
Oh, okay. After the response from the TikTok videos, did anybody from the health department, even local news, reach out to you?
No, the only journalist that reached out was from the Daily Dot. She covered it at first and it blew up after that. And that first one was about the tip out system, because I did have servers send me screenshots of their tip out and how they were going into the negative because they were paying the rest of the staff. So I was saying how it's not okay. This is not okay to make your staff pay for the rest of the staff. Pay everyone accordingly and let the servers keep their tips. So that one blew up and went viral, and it was on a lot of different outlets. The next one that the Daily Dot picked up was the one about the COVID conditions, because I had so many people telling me about how their stores had 15 outbreaks, and according to Wyman, 5 deaths because of COVID. His letter that he sent out to the managers was very profit over people based, which is their 100% their motto that they go by. It was all about numbers. He said we're closing early because people are getting sick with COVID, and had they followed the COVID protocols, this wouldn't have happened. So no one actually reached out from the health department. The only one, as far as journalists go, was the Daily Dot, and then other people picked it up after that. And then Rock United had contacted me and wanted to help out. That's really all that's happened so far. It's weird that the health department isn't concerned with this. And like, I think was it Steven said that the health department did show up and then they just went back to their old ways, which is very, very normal for restaurants to do. They get everything in shape for that one day and then they go back to normal. So
Thank you, Alex. There is actually a follow-up question here from Raymond, and I want to ask some of our speakers to address this. This problem seems to be systemic throughout the industry, not just Chili's. What can you say about that? Do you want to talk about this, Stephen, Stephanie also, and Katie?
So I definitely agree. It's definitely a systemic problem. I think one thing that kind of makes it a systemic issue is the laws that are in place. So servers technically, I guess, waive their breaks when they start working at these restaurants. And I think that this is kind of just a normal practice that all servers have just gotten used to, you know, standing on their feet all day for 12 hours, not eating anything, not sitting down at all. And I think that it shouldn't really be okay. We should fight to say, you know, I'm on my feet 12 hours a day. I should be able to sit down and eat something. We're people just like everybody else. Just because we're servers doesn't mean we don't need to sit down and eat something. So it starts with things like that. It starts with also, you know, the wage theft that they expect us to do all this extra side work at the end of the night because who else is going to do it? But really it ends up costing us money. So and that's across the board at all restaurants, not just Chili's.
Thank you. Katie or Steve?
And just to piggyback off of what Stephanie said, I noticed it at my Chili's, and I'm sure it's a problem across the entire industry, where it is these very small things that start to snowball, like such as the waiving your breaks. Like it seems like such an innocuous thing, but then these add up, and then the workers become disillusioned and think, oh, I don't deserve these rights, so we need to, you know, advocate for this kind of thing.
Thank you. All right. Well, our next question is from Libby Rainey. Libby, if you can unmute yourself.
Hi. Thanks, everyone. It's really glad to be hearing your stories. Thanks for speaking out. Yeah, a couple questions. Should I just say them all, or should I ask one and then get responses and ask the next? Can list them. There are three. So my three main questions. One, I'm really interested in this issue of the ghost kitchens. And I know, Alex, you spoke about it. I'm curious if the other three workers on the call, like, have you also had that experience during the pandemic? And can you talk about the effect that had on labor practices at your workplace? My second question is just, I'd like to hear a little bit more from you all about the issue of paid time off, sick time. You know, did you ever have an opportunity to have time off, paid time off, especially during the pandemic? Can you say a little bit more about that? And then I'm curious about, obviously, rampant sexual harassment. And Katie, thanks for sharing your story. It's horrible. I guess I'm curious if there are specific asks, like clearly there's like negligence with management and lack of accountability. I guess I'm curious, like, is it like, Chili's, will you please do this to change the way sexual harassment is addressed at workplace, you know, at restaurants around the country? So I guess the first one is ghost kitchens. I'm fascinated by those, and I know that they've been affecting labor issues in at Chili's. So I'm curious if maybe Alex, you could say more about it, and then if anybody else has also had those experiences.
In the interest of time, Libby, should we go reverse? Let's take your third question.
Whatever
Yeah.
you think.
All right.
I put those questions in your hands.
Right. Okay.
Thanks.
Why don't we do that first on the sexual harassment? Katie, do you want to address that?
Sure. Can you repeat the question?
I'm just curious if there's a specific, like, given the rampant sexual harassment, lack of accountability, is there anything in particular that you all are pushing for that Chili's change, like in its the way it handles complaints at this time?
Yeah, I would like there to be more of, HR said that they were doing an investigation, an open investigation. And you think if they were doing an investigation, maybe the other managers would know something about it, but none of my other managers know. When I told my hiring manager and I put in my 2 weeks, she had no idea and she apologized because they had no idea. So I don't even know if HR did anything. And that's just really the main problem is things could have been avoided if HR, actually was there and helped out.
Livy, does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks, Katie.
All right. On the next one about paid leave, can someone answer this question? Have you had paid leave offered by Chili's? Katie?
The only time I was ever offered paid leave was to get the COVID vaccine. I think it was like $30 or something to go get the COVID vaccine. Other than that, paid time off is not an option besides for, I believe, managers.
Yeah, when I was working, that the phrase paid time off was never even brought up a single time. The only time people they wouldn't get paid, but the only time people could just get off is if someone did get COVID, then they would have to leave work.
Thank you. How about in your case, Alex?
I'm from Florida, so I didn't even know paid time off was a thing for people in the restaurant industry. That is unheard of. We don't get breaks there either. I would work 14 hours without a break. I'd eat a few chips and salsa and go to the bathroom about once in my shift because I didn't have the time to do that. So I don't know. I never heard of paid time off until I came to California, and I'm in a new restaurant now that follows the law and follows the rules, and we do take our breaks and we can get paid time off if we accumulate the hours. So paid time off is unheard of, I think, nationwide, maybe except for California. But at Chili's when I was in California, again, I didn't get a break. Like he said, breaks were not a thing. And the paid time off was unheard of. So I didn't even know that was an option for servers. And I think that pretty much nationwide, unless you're in the state of California and you have a restaurant that follows the law properly.
Thank you. Now, on the ghost kitchen issue, Jordan, would you want to address this quickly, and then we'll ask our speakers to chime in?
Honestly, I think Alex is probably the most prepared to answer that specific question. She's written like a book about it, I feel like.
Okay, so when I moved from Florida to California was right in the middle of the pandemic in June of 2020. And when I got to California is when I found out about these ghost kitchens. This was not a thing in Florida yet, or it happened during my move. So what it is that Chili's partnered with DoorDash to have this ghost kitchen where it's just wings. They make wings, fried Oreos and fries and drinks out of their kitchen. Ghost kitchens did come around in 2015, and it wasn't meant to be for corporations to take over, but corporations took it over during the pandemic because it was so fruitful and beneficial for them. The issue is that nobody is getting paid extra for the extra work that they are doing. So when we were shut down in the restaurant, I had to work to go. And that is when I saw the abuse that is happening, and nobody had their eyes open to what was going on. They were like, oh, it's fine. It's just a thing that Chili's did with DoorDash. And I was like, you guys understand that they're making 100% of the profit and none of you are getting paid extra to do this. The kitchen is now doing double the work because they are doing work for Chili's and now they're doing work for their ghost kitchens, which by the way, they have added more than it's just wings. And same with Maggiano's with their other restaurant. And so the kitchen, now the cooks are doing twice the work at no extra pay. The to-go people are putting all these orders together at no extra pay. And now I have heard stories that guests would come into Chili's and they would be on a 45-minute false wait because they weren't actually busy inside in the dining room, but the kitchen was so backed up with the to-go orders from the ghost kitchens that they could not keep up. And no one is getting paid extra for any of the extra work that they're doing, hence the abuse and exploitation. And Apparently, this is legal because it falls under the Brinker umbrella. They are working for Brinker, so it's okay. But just because it is legal now doesn't make it okay, because it is exploitation and it is free labor. Essentially, it's what it is. It's free labor. These people deserve to get paid for all of the work, and they get no profit whatsoever. They don't even get a percentage of the tips that the drivers get. The drivers get the tip. Chili's is making profit, Brinker is making profit, DoorDash is making profit, and the people actually in the restaurant slaving away for these ghost kitchens get absolutely zero. And it affects the clientele, because now the clientele can't come in and just eat at Chili's because the kitchen is too busy with the 3 ghost kitchens that they have to keep up with. So I'm sure whoever has worked at Chili's, if you guys were there during the time of ghost kitchens, you guys also experienced this. So if you guys want to tell your stories, please do.
Thank you, Alex. We actually have a few minutes left, and we have probably 4 questions in the chat box. So I'm going to ask Araceli Martinez to ask her question. She's from La Opinion. That's the largest Spanish language publication in California. Araceli, if you're still with us, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. I just would like to see if somebody can elaborate more about the situation in Los Angeles. I don't know, it's a little bit different from the rest of the country, or we are seeing the same issues. And also, I would like to know if somebody can talk about the profile of the workers. I mean, if they are immigrants, or maybe something about that. And do you have information about how many workers Chile has in the country? And if you're planning to do to have legal action.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Should we start with Steve, because you are based in LA?
Yeah. Sorry, there was a lot of questions, so I want to make sure that I answer them all. So I'm just going to briefly answer the ones that I saw in chat. There's about, in Los Angeles County, there's about 21 Chili's, and then across America, there's a bit over 1,000. And then at my Chili's, we had a lot of the issues that we had were also spoken about by my peers here that aren't even in California. So a lot of the exploitation, the COVID practices, all of that stuff, as Stephanie was saying. And I didn't personally face any harassment, but I know that that's a very nationwide thing, specifically in Brinker. I'm sorry, what other questions can I answer? Just if you could reiterate.
Yes, if you can tell us if there is some plans to file legal action to file a lawsuit or something about it. What are the next step?
Currently.
And also Steve, Steve, for everyone who's going to answer that question, I think Araceli wants to know also your own demographics. I think that's part of the story because, you know, the largest part of the industry, there are women, immigrants, and people of color. So I think Araceli wants to know more about that. I think that was part of the question.
Yes.
At my specific restaurant, I noticed that a lot of the kitchen staff in the back of the house were all people of color, mostly Spanish speaking. And in front of the house, it was mostly white people. Besides me, there may have been one other person of color working front of house. And then as for lawsuits, currently, to my knowledge, I don't know if there's any lawsuits against them or if there's any class action stuff, but if someone could elaborate upon that.
I don't know if you can mention, or if you know what is, because I entered late, 10 minutes late. Do you know what is the average salary per worker nationwide?
We can get you that information. We'll have to get back to you on that, but we do have that data.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll email it to you, Araceli. Anyone who wants to take on that question, probably Alex, because you're now in California.
Which one? The one about people of color or the wage?
Both. Well, the people of color, if you can elaborate more on that in your experience and the workplace that you work at Chili's, that location, and wherever you are right now.
Yeah, I transferred to San Diego, so yes, the back of house was mostly all Mexican. I don't know if they're illegal or documented or immigrants. I don't know anything. So, but yes, most of the kitchen is all Mexican. And it's pretty much what Steve said. And that's really restaurants everywhere nationwide. It's mostly people of color in the back of house, and mostly majority is going to be white in the front of house. I don't know if that's on purpose, but that is, I've worked in the restaurant industry for 15 years, and that is a pattern that I have noticed. And most men are in the back of house and most women are in the front of house. So that does create a dynamic as far, a lot of sexual harassment happens in the back of house, in the kitchen, because it's mostly all men with the women up front, and they will leverage your food for whatever they want. So they use that as a power tool. As far as lawsuits go, yes, they do have a few lawsuits going on. From what I know, there are people that have messaged me that are in the middle of lawsuits with them for either stolen wages or harassment that has gone on and has gone ignored. As far as a class action lawsuit, they just updated, they just posted like your legal rights. They had to send that out because originally they said that you could not sue them. You would have to go through an arbitration. And that was a contract that we had to sign at the beginning of when we got hired unknowingly, and they got sued for that. So now they had to change their wording, and they had to put it in all of their Chili's that if you want to unionize, you can, and that if you want to sue them, you can. But they make sure that that is very well hidden. So the employees don't actually know anything about that. And like Steve said, you don't know your rights when you work at Chili's because they make sure that you don't know your rights. So, and now with the social media, the reason that a lot of people never spoke out about it, like I believe Anthony asked Stephanie why she didn't speak out about this before, is because you were told that you're not allowed to speak on this. When you get hired, you're not allowed to speak publicly about Chili's, or you can get sued. This is a new era that we're entering where people feel like they have a voice and they can speak out. And this is why people are coming forward now. I had nothing to lose. What are they going to sue me for? I didn't care. So I said my truth. And then people, I think that gave people a safety net to also share their experiences. And that is why everybody is now coming forward.
Thank you. We have 9 minutes left. I'm going to ask Maria Carmen Amado to ask her question, and then probably one more question from Peter.
Okay.
Go ahead,
Can you
Maria.
see me? Hi, everyone. I congratulate you, each of you, to have the courage to speak out. And my first question is, how do you lose and feel the courage to go out and put it out there, your, all the abuses, the retaliation, and all working, the worst working conditions, so everybody knows about this, and how do you organize? And also, I want to make sure the servers receive a salary, a base salary, or just tips. And also the second question is if there is most of the workers in general are part-time or full-time, because I know that there is a trend that everybody just offers part-time.
To answer the question about the if we get a salary, we get paid hourly. It's a wage that is below the regular minimum wage for based on, and it varies from state to state. Some states have a wage for servers as low as $2 an hour. In New York, it is higher than that because the cost of living is higher, obviously. So, and other than that, you just get tips, and those tips you have to claim most of the time, and those tips also get taxed as well.
Yeah, and also I want to find out whether if most of the workers and in general servers, cook, kitchen staff are working in the full-time basis or just part-time.
It does vary based on the demographic. So some college students will be part-time. There are also some like older workers that are full-time. But the thing is with being part-time is that managers will still schedule you for almost for full-time hours. So you might see your schedule and you'll be at, like, for New York, it's 40 hours a week for full-time. So you'll get scheduled for 39 hours. And then as a server, you don't really have like a set hour clock in, clock out time. So you might be scheduled for 39 hours, but you'll actually clock out at more than that because you're doing non-server related side work, or you have a table that won't leave. So you might say on paper you're part-time, but you actually end up being full-time by the end of the week.
Okay, thank you.
Personally,
Jordan. Go ahead.
sorry,
Go ahead,
just
Steve.
to
No, go
quickly
ahead,
add on
Steve.
to that. Personally, I would, because I was full-time, some weeks I would get 20 to 40 hours, and then other weeks I would literally get like 3 hours, and they would schedule me one day and be like, go home. I'm like, okay, thanks.
Wow. Yeah.
I did want to touch on that real quick. In the restaurant industry, a way to not have to fire people is to just cut their hours. So like Steve said, if they were trying to get rid of him, they would cut him down to about 1 day, 3 hours. And that's all they would give him because the managers have the power to do that. And then you have essentially no job. So they force you out so that you have to go find another job. And that way you can't file for unemployment because they technically didn't fire you. You technically quit. And then the other thing I wanted to say with, what was it that Stephanie was talking about? I lost my train of thought because I was talking about that, sorry.
Scheduling you for 39 hours, but then going over to.
Yes, so they did that a lot. They would make sure that you clocked out at your 39.5 hours so that you couldn't get overtime and you couldn't get whatever, if health insurance was based on a certain amount of hours, you also couldn't get health insurance based on that because your schedule was not consistent enough for you to work the hours that you needed. On top of that, I did have managers that told me that they were told to train people in more than one position so that they could use them for 2 job codes instead of 1, and then they could have them clock in as 1 job code in the morning and another at night, and they would never hit overtime, although they may work 80 hours a week.
Wow.
Okay, thank you. Jordan, I know you are very well versed in terms of the wages of the workers, tip versus non-tip. Could you expound a little bit on that?
Sure. So in 16 states right now, the tip minimum wage for tipped occupations like servers, bartenders, food runners, that kind of stuff.
It's very attractive.
Peter, we're gonna put you
Jordan,
on there.
I think there is a noise, a background noise.
Yeah, I muted them. So anyways, yeah, in
Thank you.
16 states, the tip minimum wage is $2.13 an hour. It has been stuck there since 1991. So it's been over 30 years now at this point that it's been stuck there. In some states, such as New York, it's a bit higher. In places like where Alex works, it actually is the same as the minimum wage. That's in 7 states, mostly on the West Coast. To Alex's point, that's really why we are concerned about having the servers pay other workers, because in most states, they really don't make a wage. So not only not making a wage, but they're also in a way paying for another person's salary or income. So we believe, as is true for all the other industries in America, that the restaurant industry, the employer, is responsible for paying their workers. They definitely deserve a raise. It's been 30 years. It should be the same as the minimum wage. It's ridiculous that we're still dealing with this today.
Thank you. We have 3 minutes left, and Moshin, I'm just gonna read your part of your questions, and we can send this to you. How many complaints were made in a year or 2? And probably Alex can probably put together something for you. But I just wanted you to, all of you, the workers, because the question here is very important. What's your parting words? How can journalists help you amplify your stories? Or from here, what can the journalists help you? So if we can start with Katie.
Basically just, getting our story out there so more people hear it. And like if Alex didn't put her story on TikTok, I would have never felt comfortable sharing my story. I mean, she used to work at the same restaurant I used to work at. I felt comfortable coming forward and telling my story because it got so big and I saw it. So reporters, as long as you share, our story, then maybe more people will feel comfortable speaking out.
Thank you. Alex?
Yeah, pretty much what Katie said. Please, please, please share this story because Brinker knows about my series. They have said they obviously have tried to silence me 3 or 4 times already, but somebody that is suing them told me that their lawyer told them Brinker 100% knows about your story and your series and will keep quiet and hope you go away. They're just going to ignore you, which is what they do with literally everything. So we have to hold them accountable publicly. And if we can get as many stories out, that will really, really bring awareness because not everybody is on TikTok. Not everybody is on Instagram or reading these little journalists that make the story about it. So if we can get bigger publications to get the word out, that would really, really help. I really want people's voices to be heard and I really want change to happen because they think that ignoring us is just going to make us go away. And it's not because we've been at I've been at this for like almost 6 months now and I'm not going to stop because they need to change things and they need to be held accountable for their actions and people deserve to know the truth. And I hope that people don't spend their money there because they don't deserve their money.
Thank you. Steve?
The only thing that will change this is if the public perception of Brinker and Chili's is changed. It's all money driven. So unless if these stories are getting out there and people are seeing them and hearing them, then change can happen. But if they're not and they're being ignored, then people are going to continue going there and we're going to have the same issue in 10 years.
Thank you. And Stephanie?
Basically, what everybody said, but also like help us fight for legislation that normalizes healthy work environments for restaurant industry because people in the restaurant industry have kind of just accepted this way of life and that's just how it is in the industry. And if you can't handle it, you shouldn't be in the industry, but that shouldn't be the case. We should be able to have healthy work environments just like every other profession. We make a living this way and a lot of people are career servers. A lot of people do this like for their livelihood and they don't have to put up with the abuse from both management and from guests as well.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, everyone. We really appreciate your time and participation. We will send the recording later today to all the reporters. This press conference is now adjourned. Thank you very much.